In today's photo deconstruction, I'm going to take you behind the scenes of a classic vintage-inspired fashion shoot, but we're going to do a simple, affordable, but very classy DIY set. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. One of the places that I get the most inspiration is by looking to the past. Specifically, I am regularly inspired by old Hollywood. And it could just be little things, like maybe I'm inspired by old Hollywood hair, or classic makeup, or beautiful sets, or lighting design by Horst and Harrell. And sometimes it's all of it together. And so I'm regularly taking pieces of these equations in order to make an image that feels timeless, but perhaps with a modern twist. And that's what you're going to see in today's photo deconstruction. I have photographed my muse, Brianna, yet again. I photographed her dozens of times. And she just has such a beautiful, timeless look. In fact, she's very talented even at doing her own hair and makeup. And now for this shoot, this was actually a workshop that I held at my studio. I had 5 different sets going on at once. And I teach workshops regularly here. If you want to go to learnwithlindsay.com and you go to the workshop section, I list a variety of workshops. Sometimes they're small groups, 6, 12 people. Sometimes they're larger, less expensive classes. And so you'll definitely want to check that out if you'd like to come join me in my studio and photograph some of these gorgeous looks. All right, so today we're actually going to be looking at this set. And as with any of my shoots, it always begins with concept and then figuring out how it can all work together. So loosely, the concept is I wanted to do something that was vintage inspired, in color, and kind of like warm, desaturated hues. I tend to do things that are either black and white or super saturated color. I regularly shoot things that are inspired by old Hollywood that are high contrast black and white, or I add my modern twist with super saturated color. And so in this instance, I actually wanted to try something that was neither of those two extremes, instead something that just felt warm, golden, something that would feel really luxurious. And so as you can see here, we have all of those colors working together. I got champagne curtains. This is my DIY set. Got them off of Amazon, and we're actually getting 8-foot curtains hung on C-stand arms. So I got 2 sets of curtains, pretty simple, put behind the subject, and it just gives the feeling of a little bit of environment, perhaps like she's on stage. I shoot on seamless paper a lot. I love it. I love the control of shooting in the studio, but sometimes it feels a little sterile. Sometimes I just wish I could be on an environment. And so something as simple as hanging curtains can transport me to a different era or to a different location, which is exactly what you see in this scene. So we started with the champagne curtains. Then we went with warm tones to the makeup, a little bit warmer, smoky eye. And then you'll see there's a little bit of warmth to the lighting. Perhaps you can see that a little bit in the rim light, even across her clavicles and chest. And then the dress that she's wearing even has gold embellishments on it. So everything is meant to be warm. We start off with the concept, the hair, the makeup, the wardrobe, the background, and then we move on to the lighting. So I'm going to show you how we transformed it in post-processing later on, but let's take a look behind the scenes first. So for this set, although I'm going to be using quite a few lights, it could actually be achieved in a pretty small space. In fact, this is one of the sets where I can do 2 or 3 in my studio space alone. Taking a look at the behind the scenes here, you can see that we ended up with 5 different strobes. I've got 1 main light, 2 rim lights, 1 fill light, and then another light back behind the subject. So let's actually begin with our main light. Because I was going for something with an old Hollywood feel, typically you would lean towards something with a little bit harder light, perhaps something like a spotlight or Fresnel. But I wanted to use a modifier called a Magnum Reflector. Specifically a Magnum Reflector with a grid. This gives you hard light, but it's still pretty smooth on the face, and the grid gives you control. So this is what would illuminate her face and her torso. If we pop over to the final image, you can see that that's why there is this little spotlight of light that lights her face a little bit onto the background and then just about below the bust. That is from our main light. Then I go to my 2 rim lights. The 2 rim lights I have here are the same thing. They're 1x4-foot strip softboxes, which give us nice, even illumination, just beautiful highlights in the body and across the chest. They have a grid to control the spill of light because I have condensed this to a relatively small space. And then lastly, on it, it has a CTO, a color temperature orange. I wanted to lean into this warm hue throughout. So I had the warm background, the gold embellishments, the warm makeup, and then I went with warm rim lights. We're going to tweak that a little bit more in post. So we've got our Magnum Reflector as the main light, 2 strip softboxes with grids and CTOs as the rims, and then let's add in our fill light. The fill light over here is on the right-hand side. It is a large umbrella with diffusion, which basically is a soft light source to lift up the shadows. She's wearing a black dress, as you can see. And if I, in this scene, had not added the fill light, basically the curtains to the left and right of her would have gone dark. You wouldn't see that beautiful sheen. And the bottom of that dress, especially with that gold embellishment, it would have been completely lost. So this fill light is really important to make sure I have the detail and the depth in this scene. So the last light that is here is the least important. We didn't use it too much in this shot. The last one is an overhead rim light. And I'm using an optical spot with a kit lens with a 1/4 CTO. So basically, this allows you to have a spotlight overhead with just a little bit of a warming gel. In this shot, we basically used it as a very subtle hair light. Some of the instances we were trying where the subject was further away from the background, we really pumped up that overhead light, and then we added a little bit of a haze in the can, which gave us more of a spotlight effect. However, in the final result, I like something that was a little bit quieter, a little bit more subdued. I have shot many images where there's that top-down spotlight created by the optical spot. In fact, I've shot it several times for burlesque and old Hollywood looks. But here, I thought it was better to be just a little bit more of a quiet light. So you can see here, we use 5 lights, but really the effect is primarily done with 4. So before we go over to the final image, let's take a look at the camera that was used. I was shooting with the Canon R5, my go-to 24-105. This is the 4.0. I now have upgraded to the 2.8. And you can see the camera settings are f/5.6, ISO 640. Now, the reason that I have these settings was likely because I wanted to be able to dial up and down the power of the overhead optical spot, which sometimes it's better to shoot at a higher ISO and wider aperture. But for the actual end look, where I ended up with the Magnum Reflector and the rims, I probably could have shot more at f11 or ISO 400. There's an entire video that I've created that talk about how camera settings don't really matter to the end look of your photo in the studio, unless it comes to like narrow depth of field. So you should check that out if you're curious about how I choose my camera settings. All right, so we've got our lighting. Let's take a look at what was achieved in camera versus post-processing. All right, so here you can see the final image. And let me show you what we captured in camera. So first of all, this was straight out of camera, and I think I had the wrong white balance. I think my white balance was too warm, especially considering that I had those warm rim lights. So I'm looking at this here, and she looks so yellow-orange. It's definitely not what I was going for. And I feel like my eyes are getting pulled to the edges of the frame. It looks a little too light. But I had to pump up my fill light quite a bit because I felt like the dress was just going to solid black. So as I was shooting tethered into Capture One, I started to tweak my color grading, which means I was playing around with my contrast. I perhaps was adding a little vignette. I was adjusting colors. So this is before going into Photoshop. I shoot into Capture One, but you could absolutely do this into Lightroom or whatever raw processor you're using. So here's the main adjustment I made. And you can tell hugely that the biggest adjustments to color and contrast were in the raw processing, not Photoshop. So some things I did. I warmed up the photo even more and then majorly desaturated. What that did is it made everything warmer, desaturated, and puts it all at a similar hue. So now when I do that effect, it doesn't make the rim lights look super, super orange. Then, specifically, I went into the orange hue, I picked that color, and I desaturated and lightened it up. That was the big difference in her skin. Take the orange, desaturate, lighten it up, and now everything is looking pretty smooth. I desaturated the entire photo overall, and then I added a little bit of a vignette. So you can see how the edges get dark, just a tiny bit dark. So here, again, before and after, and then Photoshop. So some things I want to do in Photoshop. I want to clean up some of the wrinkles in the curtain. I also want to extend the curtains on the left-hand side where I can see a little bit of my rim light, because remember, we were shooting in a small space. I definitely want to smooth out the skin, but I think likely in my raw processing, I probably went a little too bright on the skin. So what I did is I brought it back in, and then you'll notice a couple things. I elongate her a little bit, so I actually stretched out the frame, made her look a little taller, and I literally will just grab it. You're paying attention to when it looks too cartoonish. Like, you can tell I stretched it a bit, but if you hadn't seen the original, it doesn't look overly elongated. Next, if you pay close attention to her bust, to her shoulders, to her cheekbones and jawline, I did something called contouring, which basically what I'm doing is drawing and darkening under cheekbones, jawline, on the bust, and it just gives a little bit more finesse to the curves. So here's kind of our before and after. So my instinct for the warm gels originally was because I wanted to unite the color palette, but in reality, it went too far. So I warmed everything up, desaturated, took those yellow oranges, lightened them up and desaturated them as well, then added a vignette, but I think it went a little too flat on the face. So what I did is added more vignette and then contoured around the face and body. And I also darkened down the edges just a little bit more to bring that attention back up to our face. The result is classic, and it's warm and it's rich and it's beautiful, and yet another way that I have photographed a muse. It's wonderful to find somebody that inspires you and to photograph them again and again. It's not wrong to do for your portfolio. There are many great artists that have had muses that just inspire them, and they're creative collaborators, and they keep exploring different concepts together. So I encourage you to do the same. Now, if you love this look, the old Hollywood look, the look that's rich, that you can maybe add your own modern twist to it, I actually have a lighting recipe guide dedicated to this. So it is the old Hollywood lighting recipe guide, and I have many setups. Some of them are in color, some are high contrast black and white. They're inspired by many of the greats of the time period. And then some of them, of course, have a modern twist as well. So there's a lot of inspiration for you there. And if you love this timeless look, I also teach a workshop. I actually have a couple. One is called Beauty Throughout the Ages, where each set is a different exploration of an iconic woman or an iconic time period. And we take inspiration from the beauty there and then put it together in a photo shoot, the hair, the makeup, the wardrobe, and the lighting. And then I also do a workshop called Timeless, where I get inspiration from the past and infuse it with things from the present to create modern interpretations, modern fashion shoots. This year, the theme is movie magic. So we are going to be inspired from the earliest days of movie making up through modern day. If you want to see the gear used and the making of this image, be sure to check out the links in the description below. If you've enjoyed this photo deconstruction, I have so many more in the works, so be sure to like, subscribe, and share with friends. See you next time, guys.